Next, it being this time on a Thursday, it's of course MP from Labor, Patrick Gorman, and Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Gentlemen, thanks both very much for your time today. Why don't we start with borders? There's a bit of a brouhaha here. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, says there's no medical reason to have borders up at the moment. What's happening then in WA, Patrick Gorman?
Well, what we've seen is the Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan, putting the West Australian interest first, being very cautious. And I think everyone would agree that when it comes to questions of public safety and public health, caution is exactly what is needed. Now, we are starting to see the Prime Minister's National Cabinet fray. We've obviously got the Deputy Chief Medical Officer sort of trying to use a megaphone to tell us what we should be doing here in the West. I don't think anyone particularly welcomes that, and hopefully things will calm down over the next few days. We don't want to rush these things, and anyone who suggests that we should is probably forgotten the lessons of the last couple of months. So I'm very comfortable with the borders for West Australia remaining. So you haven't cracked there at Paul Kelly? He's wrong, is he? Well, you've got conflicting medical advice. That's the reality. The medical advice of the medical officers here in Western Australia is the best thing for public health is to keep the borders closed. So you do have conflicting medical advice.
But there's always, that, which, I mean, the absolute best thing, you get absolute zero cases. There's not medical advice just saying yes or no per se. It's a balance up of the economy. If you're going to have, I mean, should WA be going for eradication? Is that basically what the government's saying? What the government's saying is they're going to be based on the medical advice they're receiving here in Western Australia. Now, I know that the argument that the New South Wales Premier has put is that they need... I know that the argument the New South Wales Premier has put is that this is about boosting tourism in New South Wales. Now, I'm not in the business of building stimulus packages for the state government of New South Wales. I think people can wait a few more weeks, and that's all that the chief medical officers are saying here in Western Australia, and that's a pretty reasonable thing. Jason Falinski, I didn't go to you initially. It sounded like there was a cabinet being built or something. What's your view on this?
Always building, Tom.
In Queensland. Oh, gee, you're working well today. And what's happening there in Queensland, for example? They want to get down to zero. I mean, if that's their strategy, is that fair enough? Do we really need Gladys Berejiklian saying open up your borders?
Well, look, I'm glad to see that the Hermit Kingdom of Western Australia still allows television pictures out there so Patrick and I can see each other. And I'm so glad to see in Queensland...
Jason, be very careful about what you say about Western Australians. This will come back to bite you. It's a great state, and you can apologise right now. Thank you very much.
Well, I apologise immediately. But, you know, and then you've got in Queensland, you've got a state government who wants to buy an airline that I assume will be flying people from Story Bridge to Parliament House. I mean, you know, you can't... We've gone from being in a situation of where you have a culture of caution to a culture of safetyism, where the answer is zero. So why do we drive cars? Why do we get in aeroplanes? Our society just generally wants us... The same people who want us to accept the advice and what the scientists are saying around climate change are the same people who constantly ignore the advice given to us by the medical experts and the scientists in this particular instance as well. You know, ultimately where we get to is that we need to understand that in life there is risk, and it's how we manage that risk, and this culture of safetyism is just doing no one any good.
So what's happening, Jason? Is it that the chief health officers in the states are being too cautious, or that state premiers are being too cautious?
Well, as I understand it, the expert panel, the public health expert panel, has advised that there really is no need for these internal border controls. Reminds you of certain countries on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain from 1980s onwards. But, you know, the state premiers don't want to give that up. So I don't know why they don't want to do that. It's not in their interest to do that. And you've got to say, in the case of Gladys Berejiklian, thank God that there's one Premier who's actually thinking about, you know, it's all well and good if none of us have any diseases, but we don't have any pay to take home and we don't have any money to live on. I mean, this is a balancing act. Right. What was the point of us having world's best health outcomes if we continue to leave the economy shut down?
Patrick Gorman, I want to ask you about JobSeeker. Labor says at the end of this 6-month temporary doubling of it, it can't go back to the original level. For years you've been saying increased New Start or JobSeeker. You have to put a figure on it now, don't you? Well, this is a decision that's going to be made at the end of September. This is a decision that will happen in this term of government. It is, of course, Labor has said that we can't return to the level of job seeker before this crisis. The government acknowledged that that level was too low when they practically doubled it overnight. But this isn't a decision for Labor. This is a decision for the government right now. They've got a budget coming up later this year. They need to fix this. I don't think there's any argument to say it's a problem for Labor to solve. We've given the government lots of solutions to lots of their problems in recent times. But I would like to know what the government is going to do about JobSeeker. They owe the hundreds of thousands of people on JobSeeker certainty now, because this is a cliff that we're going to fall off in September.
Why can't Labor put a figure on it, begin that debate, talk about how much that'll cost as well? There's plenty of other things you put figures on. You've got a figure on how much we should reduce emissions that you put before the last election. Why can't you put a figure on this?
It's really simple, Tom. This is a decision that's going to happen in this term of government. Whatever Labor says between now and September isn't going to be able to be implemented before this problem confronts the people of Australia. Therefore, the government needs to come up with a plan.
It can be implemented, not by Labor, but it can be.
Equally, the government has thousands of public servants and experts in Treasury who can tell them how much they could need to increase it by to ensure that no one lives below the poverty line. I have no doubt they have asked those questions.
What are your thoughts? We're just a little bit short on time, so I'm jumping in there quite rudely. Can you go back to $555, the previous rate?
Look, it can't stay at the rate that it's at. There's no doubt about that. And the reason that Patrick and Labor can't give us a figure is because they can't give us a figure. They know they don't have a solution to this. The best way to keep people out of poverty, I know that this is going to come as a shock to many people on the other side, is to create jobs. The best way to reduce unemployment is to increase employment.
We're not going to have the same amount of jobs, are we, on the other side of this by September? Do you think it can go back to its previous rate?
No. Do I think it can go back to its previous? Look, ultimately, there are decisions that need to be made in the budget, Tom, but it certainly can't stay at the rate that it's at, that's for sure.
But what's your view on whether it can go back to the previous rate?
My view is that this has to be done within the context of a budget, a totality of a budget, and that the best way to actually solve the problems that we're talking about, which are problems of equality of opportunity and problems of poverty, is by creating jobs and employment, and that's not done by putting more money into welfare.
So, okay, but there's constraints of budget, but if it's possible, you might like to see it lift from its, be higher than the previous rate?
Well, Tom, you're asking me what I would like to see, and what I would like to see is us get back to a thriving economy where everyone who wants a job can have a job.
But you'd concede that won't happen by October?
Well, let's work towards making sure that that can happen as soon as possible. But what I will also concede is that it cannot stay at its current rate.
But you won't say anything about the previous rate?
I'm glad you've observed that, Tom.
All right, did my best. Just going to play a little bit of a conversation with Angus Taylor earlier on electric vehicles. Remember, Labor had that policy to have 50% of new car sales by 2030 to be electric vehicles. It was going to end the weekend as we knew it, according to Scott Morrison. What about that figure now? I asked the Minister. Would we need stricter vehicle emissions standards in Australia?
No, we just need affordable vehicles with lower emissions that people want to choose to buy because they meet their needs. I mean, ultimately, government coming in and coercing people to buy things that they don't want to buy is not the way to reduce emissions. The way to reduce emissions is that households and businesses choose a technology because it's good for them.
He went on to say that he thinks Australians are very early adopters of technology. Jason Falinski, what did you think of this roadmap outlined today? And we're not going to see the end of the weekend even with a big uptick in electric cars, are we?
We're not. And Tom, I think that you're also inadvertently pointing out the problem with electric vehicles, which is that they're still plugging into an electricity grid that relies a lot on coal-fired power stations. So even if a lot of Australians took up electric vehicles, it's not going to have the impact on our total contribution to greenhouse gases that some people hope it will have. But the technology roadmap takes into account all those different things and is now in the consultation phase I'm a huge supporter of the roadmap because it gives us the opportunity to move and gives the Australian economy the opportunity to invest in new technologies that will see us with cheaper, more reliable and cleaner energy.
And no new coal-fired power plants? Is that what you took from reading it this morning?
I didn't quite take that. I think that that is a logical outcome of it. There may be that the current coal-fired power stations that we have get upgraded so that they're continuing to produce electricity with lower levels of greenhouse gases. And of course, carbon capture and storage is a game changer in that space.
Patrick, Gorman, nearly out of time, but your thoughts on that, the carbon capture and storage in particular, happy for that to be a big part of the technology mix?
Look, I am happy to have a technology-led debate. We've always said that we're happy to accept the science on climate change, happy to accept the science on anything that actually helps reduce emissions. Obviously, this is an embarrassing day for the government in terms of their ridiculous claims linking Labor's previous electric car policy to Soviet Russia. It was interesting to see that now they actually accept that maybe some consumers do want electric cars. Maybe some people do realise that this is the way of the future, which is what the major car manufacturers have been saying for years and years. I do, of course, have concerns, as many do, about the government's plans to spew mini nuclear power plants across the outback of Australia. I know Jason's electorate was once scoped as a place to put a nuclear power plant. I'm sure he'd be out there rallying with his community saying, don't put one here. But let's be honest, the costs of nuclear compared to the benefits of renewables, it doesn't stack up, and it doesn't stack up at a micro level. I thought it was a very odd inclusion. But overall, anything that's science-based, I welcome.
Nearly out of time. Look, you've got 10 seconds to respond to that, though, Jason Falinski. You're not a partaker of NIMBYism, surely?
No, I'm not, Tom. You've caught me out again. I'm not a partaker in NIMBYism. But look, I think
there you go.
Oh, sorry.
He'll be there at the sod turning of the nuclear power plant.
All right.
I only had 10 seconds.
10 more seconds. You better get your views on nuclear power. I don't want you to, your constituents to be confused here.
If this really is, which I believe it is, if this is really a, a major issue for our generation, then we shouldn't take anything off the table, including nuclear power.
Jason Falinski, Patrick Gorman, talk again in a fortnight.